Hello Internet! Today I want to start a little project that I'm working on to do a better or more intuitive way of loading scenes between levels. I've been playing a lot of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and if you're not familiar with that game, it's an RPG and there is a club in the game, and there are 2 levels on an elevator. This I don't think is a very uncommon thing in games where there are multiple levels. What I would like to do is have each of those levels of maybe a hotel or office building or whatever be different scenes in our Unity editor. And we can load each of them independently by just going to the elevator and selecting which one to go to. This is going to happen over the course of multiple videos as I learn what I'm doing. Playing with scene loading is not something that I'm very familiar with. So that's sort of the point here, is to kind of dive into that and see what we can learn and see if we can do something cool with it. I think this will turn out cool, or it'll blow up in my face and we'll learn something either way. So what we're going to do in this video specifically is look at just loading between 2 different scenes using an async operation. So we can actually asynchronously load something. What async means is that it's happening simultaneously in parallel with everything else in your game. The important part of that means that if you are doing something asynchronous, it means the rest of your game can continue running. If you are familiar with normal loading stuff, typically everything just stops. And that's usually not great. It's sort of the Morrowind experience. We want to avoid that. And instead, ideally what will happen is you will press a button and you'll stay in the elevator, you'll be able to move around, you'll be able to do all sorts of normal things, interact with your UI, do all that other stuff. And we'll just be swapping the scenes out behind the scenes. So that's the goal. In this case, we're going to create 2 scenes. So scene A, I think I just did. Yeah. So scene A. Let's do scene A. The naming actually doesn't matter because I'm going to try to use the names to transfer between these instead of the build ID. Again, this is something that I'm still learning. Unity has messed with how their scene loading works. This async stuff was different when I previously used it, so we're still learning. I'm gonna also try to copy that. That doesn't work, so we're gonna just save the scene as scene B as well. There we go. And now we have our sample scene, which is just my test project for this. But then we have scene A and scene B. Scene A is going to load scene B. And we're going to do an additive load between these, which means that we are not going to unload everything. We are just going to effectively add on scene B onto scene A. This is not ideal, but what it's going to allow us to do is control how we remove the objects from scene A ourselves. So instead of having Unity handle that, we are going to be able to do that for ourselves. So we go into scene A, we have our main camera and our directional light. That's all fine, but I think this is going to cause some issues. So really, when you implement something like I'm thinking about, there's going to be 3 scenes. We are not doing that. The reason there's going to be 3 is there's going to be like global objects. So think about like the directional light of the sun, the player, the camera, different like global game objects, things like that. You probably want them all isolated somewhere that is going to persist between scenes. We are going to be changing all of that. So that is no longer going to happen. Instead, we're effectively going to be using 2 scenes. So there's no way to really do that. I am going to kind of fake it, and we can add that in later in the project. So we have our main camera, our directional light, and our cube. The cube is going to be just a symbol of what is loaded. That's going to be the easiest way for us to tell that this is the correct scene. Really, we have the main camera and directional light, so that should already work. But we're going to skip that, and we're just going to jump to scene B. Scene B is going to have less. So we're going to delete everything. That's going to make it appear a little bit weird in this. What you can do with Unity is actually load multiple scenes. So if you want to edit 2 things simultaneously, you can just drag and drop them over here. And now you'll see I have scene A and scene B. When we're talking about having one that controls all the global objects. This would be the editing experience you would expect, because you'd have one scene loaded that had the global elements and one scene loaded that was the current scene you were actually editing. So that way you could actually see what it would look like without having to like insert fake objects that you'd need to remember to delete later. So I added a cube. We actually don't want a cube. Instead, let's add a sphere. And so we're going to just add a sphere above it, I guess. Doesn't really matter. We just need two different objects. So scene A, scene B, we are going to unload scene B. We'll just remove it actually. There. So that's gone now. But that's what we need to load. So we need a script to do that. I do have some notes over here, just because I do not remember how to do this. We're going to be doing this with a coroutine, and those are also something that I don't use very often. Load level. Sure, why not? This is all work in progress stuff. Why is it opening another version of visuals? Anyway, basically what this is going to do is we're going to kick off a coroutine. A coroutine is a Unity function that effectively runs over multiple frames. So it's not going to complete in a single frame or a single step. It's going to be an action that takes a longer period of time. And this is captured using an IEnumerable or IEnumerator that captures the steps, I guess, you're going to take. So in this case, we have start update. We need to do a public bool load level. Maybe. This is going, there we go. There it is. And the public string of the level name. This is going very slowly. I'm not entirely sure why. Resharper is why it's going very slowly. Great. It can go away now. So we load the level, we have the level name, and that should be everything, I think. Making this up as I go, so who knows? But yeah. So we don't need a start. We're not going to use that. Instead, we're going to have this load level thing. So if load level equals true, first we should put this in an if statement, because that is not going to work. So if that's true, all right, let's do if statements correctly. All right, cool. If that's true, then we want to start a coroutine, and we're just going to say load level. And that's that. So this expects a thing. Apparently, we can't do load level. Load level async. This is probably bad form. I wouldn't necessarily recommend calling something this. The reason is async functions in C# are sort of a paradigm that this does not follow. Typically, if something has async at the end in a C# function, that means that it returns some form of task and is creating a task and doing something asynchronously using that task system. We're not doing that. We're creating a coroutine. This naming scheme, if you're doing this in your project, make sure it's consistent. This will probably confuse people who are not familiar with your project, who are coming from C#. So keep that in mind. So we need an IEnumerator, and this is just going to allow us to use yields. So if you're not familiar with C# yield, it's effectively a way to stop a function halfway through and continue where it was the next time you call it. I have an entire video on this. It goes far more in depth, but you can use this to create like infinite functions that generate things, effectively creating lists that are generated using code rather than lists that you fill and then pass to an object. So they're pretty powerful. In this case, we're using yield to kind of say wait and do something else. So the way this works is we need to start loading in a scene. So we're just going to say var progress equals the scene manager dot start. Nope, load scene. Load scene async is going to return an async operation. As far as I'm aware, this is not related to anything async in C#. It doesn't use any of that stuff. Instead, it is just Unity's own object to store information about this async operation. So you can handle that. I would need to double check, so that may not be accurate at all. But that is my understanding right now. So we're going to give it the level name. And there's this other thing, the load scene mode. The default here is going to be single. What single means is it's going to close everything else when you try to load it. That's not what we want, because that means we will lose everything that is currently there. This is useful if you're transitioning from like a menu into your real game, for example, and you don't want to carry that whole main menu UI to your new scene. But if you actually do want to just add a level on top of another one, the additive is probably what we want. So we're going to do that. And what this should do is this should mean that we should have our cube on top of our sphere with the light and the camera. So all 4 objects should exist from the 2 scenes, rather than just 3 objects in one and then 1 object. So that is sort of the effect that we're going for. If we do this right, that's what we'll see. But this is an async operation, which means it's not going to complete. When you call this function, your level is not loaded. So you can't just start doing everything that you want, because this hasn't finished. This is just starting the process. This is just saying, go drive and pick up groceries or whatever. You're just beginning that task. You need to check the progress, which is why we saved that. So progress has a whole bunch of fun things in it. We have our progress, which is a float. So you can actually track, apparently, the actual progress. I didn't know that was there. But what we care about is the is done thing. There's also a completed event, which seems like that could be useful as well. That's fine. But we're just going to track is done. So while progress dot is done, we want to make this a not. So while it's not done, we're just going to wait in this coroutine. So we should do something like this. I need to double check, but it should be yield return null. There is no object that is being returned here. Effectively, what we're saying is just yield return and then wait. So this is just going to spin infinitely until that finishes. So once we pass this block, our level has loaded. That's how we can tell. So once we get out of this while loop, the progress of this level should be completed. So we should have that new scene loaded in. So what we should be able to do is do a debug.log and just say level loaded. And hopefully that means that we did this correctly. I think this is probably the best way to do this. If you're using a callback, so if you're using the event-based system, you probably don't need a coroutine at all. You can probably just skip that. But I think this is probably the simplest. Events in Unity are something that seems relatively new. I say relatively new. They started adopting them with Unity UI like years ago. But they're still a relatively new thing compared to a lot of the other things. Like coroutines are much older than the event system. So what I imagine that would look like if we wanted to do that would be this. Var progress, we do progress dot completed, and just add a callback here and say, what does this event even contain? Async operation. So op, sure, we'll pass that in. So that gives our async operation. We're just going to say debug log level loading done. So we should see both of these actually pop up. I'm going to not do this because this is not a good idea. We're going to load the level twice. Actually, you know what? Let's do it. Why not? This can actually be kind of useful because it'll show that we're doing these asynchronously, I think. And it shouldn't hurt. I'm expecting this to be relatively fast. Our scene is not complex. So this should not be something that takes a very long time. If it is, I've done something wrong. I may have already done something wrong, but we're gonna pretend like this is all good and just go from there. But these are the two paradigms I can see happening. I would recommend doing this immediately after the load scene async. My understanding is that this is going to queue something up. So the level loading will not start until the update completes, until the end of the frame. That is not something I have validated though. So I do not know if that is the actual behavior, but that is typically how these things sort of work. If you instantiate an object, it typically waits until everything is completed, until all the updates and stuff have done, and then it will fire all the instantiations and the deletions. But again, that maybe that's different here. I would hope it works that way though, because otherwise this could theoretically turn into a race condition. So ignoring that tangent, let's run this and see what happens. So we're in scene A. What happens if we run this? We need to attach it to our main camera and do this. This is going to break. Before I do this, I was about to crash my computer. Let's avoid that. So let's say load level equals false. We were going to turn on a Boolean that was going to tell it to load a new scene twice a frame. We'd start off with about 800 some frames, and we would quickly end up with about 0 frames. So this should mean that this is a one-time operation. Obviously, this isn't how you would do this in a normal game. You would not use a Boolean to control this. You would use a function. But we are trying to use Unity's inspector as sort of a debugging tool. So we have a way to kind of test this. So that is why all of that is the way it is. So what did we call this? We called it scene B, right? So if I do load level scene B, we may need to add it to the build list. I'm not sure if that's required or not though. So we're going to find out. But if I do load level, click that, it does freeze. Null reference exceptions. Cool. Couldn't be loaded because it hasn't been added to the build list. All right, cool. So we can do that really quickly. We just go to the build settings, add open scenes. We need to switch to the project and add scene B as well. This tells Unity what scenes exist. And then the name needs to match the name of it. If you have duplicate names, so if you have multiple things that are like called main menu or something like that, instead of giving scene B as the name, you would give the full path. So in this case, it would be scenes/scene B. That's how those are distinguished. But this should now work. We should no longer get an error. Hopefully. We'll see. So if I do that, now we have 2 sets of scene B. You can actually see in the inspector over there, they actually popped up separately. And so now those should all be loaded. And we have our spheres. Everything is good. We didn't lose our other object. And both of them completed. Yay. So that is, I guess, async scene loading. This is not the best example of this. As I build out this project and the scenes get more complex, you will see why this is more useful. Just as an example, like you couldn't even tell that was a thing. There's also a non-async version. So scene manager.load scene. And you just give it the level name like this. And we want to do it additively. So load scene additive. This works too. You can just do this. So there. This should also do everything that you needed. If you have a really simple scene or you do not care about it sort of freezing, maybe like the first set of things, or you actually need these to happen at the same time for whatever reason, you can just force it with this. So we attach it to the main camera. If we go here, we can just click that, and now we get our new scene. So that also works. Again, that is a blocking call. So it is simpler, but it is going to block, which means that if the player is actually trying to actively do something in your game and you try to load another scene like the next world, whatever they're doing is going to stop until this finishes. So keep that in mind. Especially a lot of developers tend to have more powerful computers. If that's you and you're running this and you're like, oh yeah, it's fine. Double check that and make sure for lower powered PCs, especially ones with like normal hard drives and less RAM, make sure that this actually does what you think it does. Because that things performance can change depending on your system. And if you have a really overpowered system, you may not see all those performance hiccups that other people are going to experience. So that is just something to keep in mind. But this is, I guess, basics of scene loading. We'll be picking this up in another video to kind of expand on this. I talked about using 3 scenes. We're probably going to look at that next. And also being able to persist one scene and keep the other 2 sort of in flux. So we can swap them out and unload them. So that is the next plan. So hopefully this is useful and you can use it in your projects. I tried to keep this as simple. Like I know there's just how do I load a scene? That seems like a useful thing. So hopefully we cover that here. I'll post some links in the description to some of Unity's documentation that goes through a lot of this same stuff. Their code is fairly similar to mine. So hopefully it all just kind of comes out and you can use it. So that is everything that I have. So I will see you in the next video. So until then, see you, Internet.